Day, but it's just warm and gorgeous in here, I think, because of Talmadge's work. And I'm really happy to be showing her this month. It's just been really fun. All the visitors coming in that are big fans, and she's here today to talk about her work, answer questions. You'll notice we have very few chairs, but we're going to try to keep the talk kind of moving and engaging with the artwork. And I have some lemonade in the office if people need to go in there and grab a drink. Just, make yourself set home. And please help me welcome Talmadge Doyle.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Karin and Tina, so much for this show. It's really appreciated. And okay, so I do want to keep us moving around because it's no fun standing in one place. And there's a lot of different techniques in this show, and actually a couple different kinds of work. So if most of you have already looked around, and you'll notice perhaps these small oil paintings of trees. Those are all Sitka spruce trees, and all of those paintings I did while I was at a residency out at Sitka Center for Art and Ecology on the Oregon coast. If you don't know about it, I'd be happy to talk about it later. It's a fabulous place, and it's 7 miles north of Lincoln City, and they have classes there for 6 months out of the year, workshops, and then artist residencies there for the rest of the year for all the really super rainy months. So it was an exquisite place to be, and it rained, it poured every day, and so I was in my wonderful studio with printmaking presses, and I just had looked out the window at all these wonderful glistening green colors and rain, and I started painting the trunks of the trees. So that's where those came from. And so talking about conifers, the Sitka spruce, a number of these pieces were inspired by conifer cones and seed pods. And for example, well, this piece that I have a plate here too, it's called Cascade 2. So I have this plate, which is actually a copper plate, but it has steel facing on it to make it a little harder. So when I print editions, it makes the textures, the opacity textures last longer. That's why I had a steel face. But usually I just print from copper plates. So this is, of course, the print, and it's always in reverse for making. And so these are all conifer seed see cones and pods, and some of them had already fallen apart. So, okay, I'll back up a little bit. So the title of the show, After the Storm, I started, after the couple of storms that we had last winter, I would walk every day and I started dragging things home that I would find on the ground. You all remember so many of the trees came down and debris and, and then the second storm came, but I just started bringing things home to draw and putting them up on my wall in my studio and shining lights on them, and I started noticing the beautiful shadows and silhouettes that they created, so I started drawing those. And to add contrast to that strong silhouette, some of them I added a second plate that had lines running through it, because I wanted the contrast of the sort of delicate linear patterns going through the strong silhouettes. I wanted a strong graphic, but also I can't get away from detail. I'm obsessed with detail, so I wanted that more fragile detail on there too. And let's see, the piece, now I'm talking about conifers, so the piece right over here, right behind you guys, right there, it's called Conifer Bouquet. And I just started doing ink drawings of all this plant matter that I was bringing home. And then from the drawings, I started working on the copper plates and the woodcuts. So this is a woodcut, and this is it's kind of funny because the whole time I was carving this block, and I carved it for weeks and weeks on and off, I envisioned it as being completely upside down from what you see. So I envisioned all these branches coming down from top and coming down. And then, so after weeks of looking at the image that way and finally getting to the printing, I realized that I wanted it upside down. So I just thought that's never happened to me before with images. So I just thought that was an interesting twist, that I wanted that movement coming up from the bottom and moving out, sort of more of that growth pattern moving up and out. So yeah, a lot of these pieces are, really about movement and about either some of them are really moving up, and then some of them are moving down. And it was a real switch for me. Those of you who know my work from just a few years ago, I did a lot of detail work, a lot of animal imagery, but a lot of tiny, tiny little lines. And I was just really tired of all the little tiny, tiny little lines. And I really wanted to do something different. And so working with the silhouettes, it took a while to get going, lots of drawing, and these silhouettes really helped me, sort of break out of what I had been working on and into the next thing, which I really needed to do. And so if anyone has questions on the way, they can ask those questions. That's fine. Yeah.
Well, you said it took you a while to carve. This is a woodcut.
Right.
Okay. So you brought home a bouquet and you arranged it. Did you take photographs and did you draw maybe many times before you started carving? Is that?
Oh, okay. So how did I come up with the drawing? Well, I didn't take any photographs, and I didn't really have a bouquet like that formed. I just had all these little pieces, and so I started drawing from the pieces. And does that answer your question? And basically, when I was doing the drawing, the ink drawings, the composition would form from that.
So you had these ink drawings of parts of this arrangement, and with your experience and talent, you composed it then in the carving. Actually, you had this disparate parts,
right?
And you had it all in your head plus on paper, and And you composed it as you carved? Or?
Well, so I composed it on the paper with the drawings.
Okay.
And then, so I did do a drawing of what I wanted the woodcut to look like. Yeah, and then in the process of carving, some things changed, but that was a good part of it. Yeah.
Did you transfer that drawing to the wood block?
Yes, I did.
So you had something to go by.
Right, right. Actually, I did use photography in the process because I took the drawings, some of the drawings, to a copy shop and blew them up different sizes so I could, the original drawing was probably a little, maybe 75% that size, so I could blow it up to whatever size I wanted and then transfer it to the block. So I have that image on the block and then carve it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I should know this, but how did you transfer the drawing to the block?
I used carbon paper.
Well, you just did an outline, I think, because you could take Indian ink and just, draw the thing on on the block, but you decided you.
I just in the habit of using carbon paper and just lines, little lines, so that I can see the image. Yeah. Yeah, does that make
We all
sense?
remember carbon paper.
Remember carbon paper? Actually, they still sell it in big sheets. Like some architects use it still, but I don't even think they use it anymore. I better buy enough to last me a lifetime.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So, yeah.
It always seemed interesting to me with printing like that, the colors and the images, like, are you kind of mentally looking backwards as you're doing it, or do you kind of not know what it's going to be like till you, like, really lay it down?
You mean till I actually print it?
Yeah.
Have a print of it?
Yeah.
I have an idea, but I'll tell you, that's a really interesting question because especially with the etchings, I still, I've been doing etching for so long, but I'm still surprised when I pull a print for the first time. I wipe the ink on the copper plate and I put it down in the press and roll it through and peel it off, and I'm always somewhat surprised. Like I have an idea of what it's going to look like, but it's always sort of a surprise sometimes it's a very pleasant surprise, and sometimes it's not, but it's always like, wow, look at this, look at it. It's an interesting process because you would think by now that I would, know more of what it's going to look like, but it's always, so that's a good, and of course it's always in reverse, but I don't even worry about the reverse that much. Certain pieces I do, is the general movement going to be going this direction or this direction, but oftentimes I don't even think about it because I think usually if a composition works one way, it's going to work the opposite way. Yeah, so, yeah. Right, and a lot of these pieces are woodcut and etching combined. So for example, let's say this piece right over here, we can move around a little bit as he's standing. This piece right here, this is called pollination. And this piece here is the dark silhouette that you see is woodcut. And so all those little marks you can see the woodcut marks, the dark marks behind. And then there are 3 etching plates that are printed over that. And then I also hand colored. So on some of these labels you'll see the description in hand coloring, which basically means hand painting. It's really a tradition in printmaking that goes back to several centuries when they were coloring maps, old antique maps. And so some of this yellow here and some of this green, a little bit of this orange is hand colored. So this is an edition of 12. So a varied edition. I say varied edition because they're just very small differences. You'd have to look at them close to each other and examine them. A varied edition, there's very small differences. So edition of 12, so I hand color each one. So,
but you did it basically the same.
Yes.
More or less.
Right. See, when I say varied edition, and that sort of lets me off the hook with the printmaking police. That said, wait a minute, this is not a new. So varied addition, or advar is French term. So yeah, addition varié, Yeah, so.
Well, that one caught my eye, the katsura, because it says sugar lick. Did you?
Oh, yeah.
elucidate that?
Yeah, sugar lick. So that's an old technique used in etching. And what happens is you have on your copper plate, you paint this mixture. It's a mixture of caro syrup, so lots of sugar and India ink and gum arabic, which is in a lot of paint. So you mix this stuff up and you paint it on these areas that you want dark. Now this is going to be a little technical because it's step by step, so I'll go pretty fast. But so you paint it on these areas that you want on the plate, just on the raw copper plate, and then you let it dry, and then you put a ground over it, traditional hard ground. It's an asphaltum ground. And then you put it in warm water, and the sugar lifts through the ground and exposes all the areas where you painted the sugar solution on there. And then I put an aqua tint on it, which is a whole different, which is like, this is an aqua tint. It's a technique in etching where you get these continuous tones. And so it's like sort of almost like using a stencil, like a reverse stencil. And so I put the aqua tint on these exposed areas, and everywhere where it's not exposed is blocked out, if that makes sense, yeah. And then etch that, and then hope that it all works.
What's aqua tint?
Pardon me?
What is aqua tint?
Oh, okay. Thank you for asking that. That's a good question because I do a lot of aqua tint. So I do aqua tint the traditional way, although I'm in the process of switching to a more non-toxic method. It's not super toxic, but what I do is I put I have what's called a rosin box, and in this box, it's a big wooden box. In this box is ground up tree sap rosin, very, very fine dust. And I have a crank and I stir it all up in there, and then I open the door and I put the plate in and I close the door and let all this little fine dust fall on the copper plate. So, and I time it so that I get exactly 50% coverage of this fine little dust. And then I melt this rosin dust onto the plate, on a hot plate, and then I etch that. So it gives you basically all these tiny little pits in the copper that will collect ink. Okay, I know, it's like all these magical processes that don't feel magical when you do them. Sometimes they don't work, right? Just the way you wanted them to. And then sometimes they give you really, happy accidents. Sometimes really interesting things happen that you didn't expect, that you might really think, oh, I'm just going to go with this. And that's the beauty of printmaking, because things happen all the time, and the medium leads you somewhere else where you didn't think you might go, and you're always one step removed, or 2 or 3 steps sometimes, from the process, as opposed to painting or drawing. Well, you're right there, every mark you're making. So the process of printmaking sort of leads you in a perhaps different direction than you'd normally go. Yeah. So that doesn't sound terribly toxic, or the fumes from the resin?
Oh, no. I mean, the old methods of printmaking, the antique methods, unchanged, were probably not very good. They used to use, acids that have fumes and things, but people don't use those anymore. No one that I know anyway. And so, but people are switching now to water-soluble inks that don't require solvents. So that's there's this whole non-toxic movement going on in printmaking to make it completely non-toxic. So that anyone with allergies or sensitivities, and just anybody. So just making it more environmentally friendly. Yeah. So.
Does that affect the longevity of the prints? Does it change?
Does what affect the longevity?
Using non-toxic.
Oh, you mean inks?
Yeah, this-
Oh,
how long?
well, you know, that's a good question.
Yeah, no.
I still use all oil-based inks myself, because I haven't done enough investigation to the water-based to switch over. I can't get I haven't found the richness that I want yet. But you mean the longevity of the pigments and how, you know, I haven't heard, I don't think so. Because I think that basically the pigments are the same kind of pigments suspended in maybe different mediums. So I've never heard that they do. Yeah.
But it's also the case that they can kind of do these synthetic studies on all this stuff and conservation stuff and sort of say, you know, make up studies.
Uh-huh.
They try to recreate conditions that simulate 100 to 200 years, but we honestly don't know.
Oh, right.
We
Okay.
honestly won't know.
That's a better
So,
answer,
200 to
actually.
300 years from now, when somebody sits and looks at it and says, wait a minute, what happened here?
Yeah, yeah. Where's my print? Where did it go? Where did it go? Yeah. So I stick to the old ways. Some of them not, you know. So, yeah. So, let's see. Oh, and this piece by the door, I just want to talk about this for a minute, because this piece I did right before I started all this botanical work, which is a theme I revisited from about 20 years ago, the botanical work. So this owl piece is an etching, 3-plate etching, and it has hand coloring on it. And if you look closely at it, I know some of you have, you'll see that line star pattern that it has, and there's sort of 2 layers of that going on. And it took me on and off over a year to finish this piece. It's the last piece I did that made up of tiny little lines all together. But I'm really interested in fractal patterns and how they reoccur in seemingly different, you know, unrelated parts of nature. You know, it's like these are from star patterns, but you see the same kind of patterns in like starfish, for example. So that kind of thing is really interesting to me. And you know, patterns, all kinds of, you know, if you look at a big leaf, and you can see all the veins in the leaf. And so all these little tiny, tiny patterns in the leaf are then reflected in the larger pattern of the tree. So that kind of thing is very interesting to me. And so as you'll notice, I actually used this same etching plate of this star pattern in a number of these, like this one too, but it's very subtle. It's sort of in the background here. This one, Katsura, has that pattern, and this one too. This one too, the Vespertilio, the bat, has that pattern. So you know, sometimes when I have abstracted plates like that, I can use them over and over again in different ways, turn them upside down and cut them up and things. So I'm sort of combining the abstract with the representational aspects. So yeah, this was the last animal I did, and then kind of moved on to the more botanical. Right.
Well, that was a great finale.
Oh, thank you. That owl is a Eurasian eagle owl. And he actually lives, he was my model, Dimitri. He lives at the Raptor Center, the Cascade Raptor Center. And I saw him, he was actually outside of a store, a grocery store, and a couple years ago.
Marketed choice.
Yeah. And I saw him, he has these giant orange eyes, bright orange eyes, and the largest owl species on the planet. And I just was transfixed by him, and so I went up and drew him and hung out with him. And he's a very social owl, which is very unusual. He's actually the only bird they have that was born in captivity. And they use him for educational purposes, but he's very social, very people-oriented. He'll come to your birthday party. You can hire him. I'm doing an advertisement for the Raptor Center. It's such a great place that you can hire him to come to your birthday party and hang out. And he does tricks and everything. It's amazing. It's amazing. So he was my model for that, and he was just such an exquisite creature. I was just compelled to make this image work even after months and months of not having it come together, because I wanted to combine that geometric with the more organic form of the owl and the feather patterns, and finally I got it to mesh together and work, but it took a lot. So I did it, yay! So that was it. So yeah, it's
Well, Karin
great
declined to pronounce the name of the piece,
yeah.
so
Does
I'll put you on this
Gaelic
one.
here? Does anyone speak Gaelic?
I'm Scottish, but I don't speak.
Gaelic, Cailage Odich is the title. Actually, this is Cailage Odich, Turning Poison into Medicine. That's the whole title.
Okay.
I know that sounds like really, an odd, those words are so different and hard to pronounce. But I thought it was so interesting because in Gaelic folklore, the owl is looked at differently than in a lot of other mythologies. That it's considered an omen of bad. It's about death, and not everywhere, but there's a lot of that about the owl. And reading about this mythology, they see the owl as being this creature that can turn disadvantage into advantage or poison into medicine. And so I just thought that was so interesting. That's sort of a more positive way to look at things. So so that's that piece. And then I did these giant pine cone drawings. There's there's one back there. If you haven't seen that one, please look at that one. That's my favorite. And that was really inspired by Morris Graves' drawings. I just love his drawing. I'm a big fan of Morris Graves, and so that pine cone image back there, and then the one large charcoal drawing here and one over here. Sort of the spiral universe of the pine cone really was interesting to me, and so I have sort of the microcosm and the more macrocosm, both the big trees and then the giant pine cone. Yeah, it's kind of going back and forth there.
Did you do those recently or were those older?
Well, I did do some pine cones about 20 years ago, and then I started redrawing them. And one of them I actually found in an old portfolio that was just half finished, and I decided that's what inspired me to keep on doing them when I was working on this body of work. So I reworked it and finished it, and yeah.
So did you start those with smaller drawings, or did you think to get this expensive piece of paper and just go for it?
Actually, I started them on big pieces of paper. I was too lazy to do little drawings. Gotta get her, just do the big, because I knew I wanted to do them really big, so it was really hard to do them small, and
With spontaneity.
yeah, it's when I teach drawing, it's okay, now do your thumbnail sketches, but I don't do that. Sometimes I do, sometimes, but not for those, yeah. So a lot of this work is about, what I see just walking around in our beautiful, beautiful environment here, up on the Ridgeline Trail, and just being in the forest is just a really wonderful, nurturing place for me, and I just need that. And so it's, a lot of this imagery comes, inspired by just being and walking in the forest, and at Sitka and here and other places. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah. So anything? Yeah. Oh yeah, the fern pieces. Yeah. So this piece, I actually this and this piece all came originated from the same copper plate. So the original copper plate was about this big, and I originally conceived it as being a large print, and I printed it, and the print just wasn't working the way I wanted. So my friend Susan Loudermilk, my printmaker friend, book artist friend, she came over and she said, just crop it and start cutting it up and doing these, creating different compositions. So what I did is I printed it on, like this one, for example. If you get up real close, you can see that this paper that the print is on, and there's two different kinds of paper here. So I did what is called a sheen collé. I took a base sheet of paper, cotton European paper, really heavy, that you can see this sort of tannish paper here. And while I was printing it, after I printed it, this sort of non-traditional sheen collé, I took the Asian piece that had already been printed on 3 times, these patterns and the ferns, and glued it onto a base sheet of paper. So that way, I could use part of the plate, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So I had the whole plate printed on these Asian papers, and then I took part of it and I cut it, just perfectly square and everything, and made a different composition. So these, I have these beautiful ferns in my yard, and when I started this series, the way I started it is I didn't know what to do. I wanted to do something new, so I took all these, about 80, 90, 100 pieces of paper that were about 6 by 7 inches, and I went in my backyard, which has a lot of trees and ferns, and I just did these quick ink drawings to just sort of generate ideas and get things going. And I kept on going back to the ferns and drawing the ferns, so then I started drawing these more detailed ferns. So I guess these are still tiny little lines. Yeah.
What is this?
Right. So this is in 2 different etched linear plates of star patterns, and the fractal patterns that you see in ferns. As the fern is unfurling, you can really see it. There's all different kinds of spiral patterns that happen in ferns, and different kind of vein patterns that are very fractal. So the fractal patterns sort of relate to the growth. It's actually a growth pattern. I wish I had a scientist here to talk about this more articulately. But so these patterns relate to the patterns in the fern, sort of on a different scale, which is what fractals are sort of all about. These patterns happening on smaller and smaller, larger and larger scales.
Is that kind of like what you're doing with the
Like I use some of these same plates and the linear plates printing on the owls, right. And there it was sort of more about the stars, the patterns of the stars. At least that's what I was thinking. It may not, because the owl and night one and yeah.
So you cut the paper, not the plates.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the plate is still big.
Okay.
But I cut the paper.
Chopped up copper.
Right. I have done that too.
Sure.
But yeah. Right. Right. So.
I was going to ask about the hand coloring that you do. Do you use watercolor or aqueous inks?
I use watercolor. Yeah, just water-based
Yeah,
inks.
there's some
I mean,
beautiful
paints.
touches of the hand color in this piece and other pieces.
Oh, thanks, Elena. Yeah, I like that subtleness that the watercolor can give against the real strong saturation of the inks. Having that contrast. That's really nice, yeah.
I was wondering too, as another art instructor.
Yeah.
We ask our students this all the time. What do you feel is the strongest piece of the show?
Oh my God.
Is there one that you really feel really.
Tally, say one that hasn't sold.
Or it could be your favorite.
Right, well, these two, the one that I was pointing out to you before, Cascade 2, and then this one over here, the Cascade 3. I always get these 2 and 3 mixed up. So this piece, I think I have a real fondness for because it really, to me, expresses that storm, what happened, the storm, everything was just flowing down. You know, I live on a hill, and it seemed like everything was just coming down, and parts of trees, and just this kind of this strong motion, you know, sweeping down. And it was kind of a breakthrough piece for me too. This is one of the first pieces I did in the show because it was, I was dealing with these strong silhouettes, but I wanted this delicate line running through it. So I just sort of drew very spontaneously. Sometimes I'm good at drawing spontaneously, sometimes I'm not, it just depends. You know, sometimes but so these lines here, I didn't plan out at all, I just drew really quickly. And actually these lines, almost everything here is printed from a copper plate except there's a couple, just a couple prints where I used a plastic plate, plastic styrene plate to just draw directly into. So it's not actually etched into copper, it's just drawn right on the plastic plate. And there's some difficulties with that. You have to kind of do it just right, but it really worked out well, and it was so fast because there was no etching involved. There was actually a dry point technique. So dry point means just drawing, traditionally it means just drawing directly with an etching needle on the copper, and there's no etching involved, just digging right into the copper, and which is really fun to do. And so, yeah, I think this piece is probably, who asked me that
I
question
did.
again?
Well, the
You did, yeah, that's
composition,
right.
I love that piece. I think the composition is so strong. The movement, the rhythm established with a combination of the shapes and the lines and the cluster of lines that was used. You know, the top and the balancing of the larger shapes. So, yeah, it's beautifully balanced.
Thank you. Yeah, so I print small editions, so I print, this is 10. It's a lot of labor to print. And then sometimes I'll print the edition and then I'll take the plate and work on it more and turn it into a different composition. You know, because when you have copper, you can always just scrape or you can add more etching and turn it into something else. So, yeah, actually, people don't usually notice this, but these 2 red plates, these prints here, are printed in a different way with different work, another plate added to them from this plate. And so, you know, when you're a printmaker and you need to fill a whole gallery, those little tricks really help because you come up with different compositions, and you use the same plates though, because it's months, sometimes months of work developing a plate. And, you know, sometimes the techniques don't quite work how you want, so you have to do it over. And, you know, usually that doesn't happen, but they're very time consuming. You know, everything's done by hand, there's no computers. So I don't use any machines. This is all the old ways. So, yeah, so.
While you're over there, I was talking to some folks about, we were taking a guess at which order and how many times you ran this piece through the press.
Oh.
This is the next step in Art Walk. We're at White Lotus Gallery, one of my favorite places. Wonderful works, also works of jewelry. The back room's a treasure because different artists, different things, fascinating work. And featured artist here is one of my favorites. I finally got to meet him, John Cruzen, who certainly has a remarkable pedigree in the art world and has done some truly remarkable work based on some sketches that he took in the eastern part of the state and at a residency at Playa. So he can fill us in on the where and the why and even explain his texture, and he'll tell us about his medium right away. So John, it's a pleasure to see this show. So give him a hand, let's learn something. Oh, you don't use one, not required then, good.
If you can't hear me, holler though. I had a residency in Playa in 2011, and Playa's over in southeastern Oregon. If you would go over into Bend and you go south from there.
Just take a step back, it's better light for her.
Oh, better
Thank
light.
you. There we
Okay. And the residency lasted a month, and there were 6 other artists there at Playa, and all we had to do was work. Everything was supplied, meaning our studio, our food, our housing. All we had to do was bring our own equipment and work. I chose over at Playa it's on Summer Lake, by the way. Its elevation is 4,000 feet. Right across the back of Playa is Winter Ridge, which is 7,200 feet, so you have some elevation there if you wanted to go up and down. Basically, what I finally ended up doing was doing a lot of sketches. And from these sketches, I chose the edge of the lake on Playa. It's Summer Lake. And I covered the wall, one wall in the studio with all these sketches, and then I started painting from the sketches. Then when I came back to Eugene in my studio here, I continued working from these sketches. And so basically, it's the edge of the lake. The medium is these are all on board because it was easy to carry over there rather than large canvases. It's all acrylic. So the medium is acrylic on board. And there's no media in it. I use just water for those who are acquainted with different materials. You can add other things, but I just use water. And that's basically how this series evolved.
And what I find remarkable with acrylic, that you get this sense of texture that with the color pops out. I would have thought from back of the room it's oil with, with other material. Instead, it's quite dynamic.
No, it's just all acrylic. And also, too, one of the reasons I used acrylic is all you have to do is water. You don't have to take all those solvents, and it was easier for me to work with. Also, one of the things that happens with acrylic on board, it slides easier than on canvas. So you don't have that resistance when you're working. So that's a technical thing more than anything else. So basically, I chose the edge of the lake. When you get over there, the horizon is expansive. It's basically out at the head of the Great Basin. There's not a lot of foliage. Some of it's ranch land around the lake. It's basically a dry lake over a certain period of time of the year. And there's just an awful lot of subject matter, so that I hadn't focused on one thing, and I just chose the ecotone. It's the edge. Some of them are reflective, some of them are called ecotone. It's basically where two environments merge. So you have two ecologies happening.
It's fascinating on a couple of them. You get the sense of the curvature of the Earth because of that distance. We don't get that around here. Too many trees, no way. But so that's an interesting notion there. That sense of distance.
Are there any questions? We like questions. It's easier to answer questions. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Dick Easley, kind of the factotum here at White Lotus Gallery. I do what H.P. Lynn tells me to do. But one of the things I found interesting in one of John's earlier presentations is that instead of starting off with a whiteboard, John started off with a blackboard. And I think that creates something that I haven't seen in John's work in years, and that is a sense of light that emanates from many of these pieces in a very dramatic fashion. And I think that it's sort of an interesting technique and certainly a welcome facet to this new work.
What Dick's talking about is usually when a painter works on a ground that's a colored ground, it's usually white. It's a gesso ground. In my case, I used a black gesso ground. I noticed in Mexico when I'm down there, a lot of the artists will use a red ground. In other words, they'll paint the background all red. And if you go back in art history, Bonnard and Vallard used a color that was very similar to cardboard. And there's something that happens when you lay a paint down against that color. It changes things. The only disadvantage, though, is that with some of the colors in acrylic, they're translucent or semi-transparent. And so you don't have that glow where the light goes through and hits the white background. On the black, it's different that way.
Other questions?
John?
Yes?
How do you think of the color after you bring your sketch back into the studio?
Well, some of the sketches have notations. They'll have HIY, which means high intensity yellow. And so some of them are coded. After a number of years of painting, when you're looking at something over a period of time, I just sort of automatically register what colors I'm going to use with that sketch or those sketches. And so sometimes there are notations on my sketches. My sketches are all in black and white. I use a Sharpie. And they're about maybe a minute, 2-minute sketches, and that's it. So I just want to get the impression of what I'm seeing. So it's almost like a gesture sketch.
So to get to some of these places, it looks like an aerobic experience because you're elevated for a number of these. Well, were you gasping? I mean, how did you find some of these places?
Well, Winter Ridge, which is right behind Playa, the residency, is 7,200 feet. And so you can hike up on that, or you can really, if you want to go up, you drive up to the top and you look down because you're going from a 4,000 elevation to a 7,000 elevation. Or else, and back to the compound, I just hike up on the hill. So, and sometimes I drove up on certain roads and looked down, yeah. So it changed the elevation. Besides, I like to tilt the elevation anyway, sometimes unnaturally, so.
The piece just behind you is a
This
pretty
is-
good example.
Yeah, this is pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
食べて、また一応もう